Podcasting, the latest frontier. These are the episodes of a Catch as Catch Can podcast. Its continuing mission: to explore strange, nerdy topics, to chat about sports, movies, sci-fi, and so much more. To boldly pod where this nerd has gone before. Captain's log, pod date 0217.19. Now, on this episode of Too Boldly Pod, we're going to get a little bit serious, and then we're going to have some fun, and then we're going to have a little bit more fun. And what do I mean by that? Well, we're going to talk about protesting from the 60s to today, and then we're going to answer a few fun little Too Boldly Pod social media questions, and then we'll close it all off with a little bit of a sports topic. So, Scotty, set phasers on stun, engage. Now, I've been thinking a lot lately about my old mentor, Billy, and about how all this uproar has been going on politically and on social media and all the protests and whatnot. And it got me thinking about the talk that him and I had back in 2016, just before the presidential election between Trump and Hillary Clinton. And at the time, I was thinking about the comparison of all the peace protests in the 60s and how they relate to today. So I went to Billy and I asked him, you grew up in that era, you're living in this era, and what are the correlations between it? So I thought I'd take this opportunity to cut out a little snippet from that interview and see how much it still holds up even 3 years later. And right now we are joined by one Billy the Bluesman Floyd, and him and I are going to have a little discussion about the protest movement of the 60s and 70s. So you said you grew up in the 60s, so tell us a little bit of what the protest movement and everything was like back then.
Well, yeah, like I said, I grew up about 35 miles east of Atlanta, and I was about 35 minutes south of Athens. And we had a college in the town where I grew up. We had Oxford College. Plus, Atlanta had several universities, but the University of Georgia in Athens, so I was in proximity to all of it. And Atlanta was a big part of what they called the hippie movement back then. And being at that age, I was drawn to that. And it really opened my eyes. I got to looking around. One thing that happened, I had a brother that did 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. And I saw the changes in him when he came home. And I got to looking at this thing from a serious standpoint. And I did not like what I saw. We had people going over there, and they did not know what they were getting into. They were lied to when they went over there. We were in a war. The people there did not want us there. They didn't want us to save them. They wanted to be turned to communism. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying communism is a good thing, but it's not all bad either. These people were starving to death. They were poverty-stricken. And communism would have solved a lot of their problems. It would have took away all of their freedoms, which would have been a very big downside, but they would have been. And we came in and tried to force them to be Democrats. I mean, to be a Democratic country.
Right.
And so I learned that while they were over there, you know, they were having to fight the people they were there to help as much as they were the Viet Cong. And that got me to looking at why were they going over there. And I got to looking at the people that were sending them there. Several things happened in the early mid-60s. Kennedy was assassinated. Johnson took over. Then Nixon came in. And that's where it all pretty much started going downhill in a hurry. Always bad, but that was when it hit bottom. And naturally, it all came out. Let's face it, we can say what we want to. Nixon was a crook. You know, and he cheated his way into office pretty much.
Right.
And he admitted and was charged. And, you know, when you look back at it, in my lifetime, I saw a president assassinated. I saw a president go through impeachment proceedings. I saw a president resign to keep from going through impeachment proceedings. I saw a president resign because he was guilty of tax fraud.
Right.
I saw us have a vice president and a president, neither one of which were elected by the people. They were both appointed by the government. And then I saw a second president that ended up getting in trouble to go through impeachment proceedings. And then I saw America attack on their own soil. Now, I did not believe war was necessarily unavoidable. War is never a good thing. Sometimes it is a necessary evil. You know, I don't think we should sit back and let terrorists attack our country, but we need to pick and choose more wisely. And from the proximity I was to Atlanta and Athens, where the two main universities were, we had a college in my little hometown. But Atlanta especially was a hotbed of activity for protests. There's several universities in Atlanta. And there was a newspaper came out in Atlanta, an underground newspaper they called it back then, called the Great Speckled Bird. And I started reading it religiously. And I learned a lot about the government. And there were some activists came in that was with a group called the SDS, Students for a More Democratic Society. And I got to know some of these people. And they helped organize some protests at our little local college there in Covington. And some of the people from Atlanta spread from there to Athens. And when Kent State happened, if you're not familiar with Kent State, there were some students that were marching and protesting. National Guard was called in. National Guard shot and killed 4 students. And nothing was done to them.
Right.
I mean, you know, I've always wondered, why weren't they charged with anything? They murdered 4 students.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's when it really hit the fan in Athens. And that's when I kind of walked away from Athens. I believed in peaceful protest. But all of a sudden in Athens, they were burning down buildings and they set the student union on fire. They burned down the military part of the university there. I don't know exactly what they call it. I don't remember now. We also did a lot of drugs in the 60s, so my memory's hazy on the face.
Now,
did I say that out loud?
That's okay. We can delete that. Now, you mentioned how it sort of took off when Nixon was elected, and sort of flash forwarding a little bit to today, we're getting a lot of these protests with the Trump rallies and whatnot, and they're getting really violent where they're protest against Nixon back then, and were they violent like these are now?
That's when they first started turning violent, some of them. The violence really took off after Kent State. But most of the protests against Nixon were mostly peaceful protests, or at least the ones that I was a part of. I know there were some where there were some rocks thrown, bottles thrown, that kind of thing, you know.
Right.
But the stuff that's going on today, I know there's a lot of really hardcore violence going on at a lot of the Trump rallies.
It's funny because I mentioned on Facebook this week about how it was the anniversary of Abraham Lincoln saying a house divided against itself cannot stand, and boy, is that a prophetic line looking at the world today.
Yeah, I saw that. And Abraham Lincoln, by the way, was one of my heroes.
He should be everybody's hero.
He was exactly right. And I see a lot of other protests nowadays, too, that I think are going down the wrong path. Something else I marched for was civil rights. And a lot of people don't realize it, but the student protests against the war came directly out of the civil rights protest. They were pretty much our blueprint for protesting against the war. We learned from them. But even those protests, I hate racism. And a lot of the protests that I see nowadays, their ideas may be right, but the way they go about it, it's just racism. Racism is racism. I don't care what color you are.
Right. No, and that's part of the problem with social media today is because people take their little memes and their sound bites and they kind of skew everything. So you don't know what's true and what's not. I know you're a big Trekkie, and I always have to bring Star Trek into every conversation somehow. Do you?
Yeah, I made up my mind. I was not going to say anything about Star Trek, and that's no blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, no.
If you're a true Trekkie, you'll get that joke.
I do.
What was the name of the episode? Something Eden, where they were looking for Eden?
The Way to Eden.
Yeah, The Way to Eden.
You can call me Herbert. That's fine.
But yes, we were talking Star Trek.
Do you think that season in general, that third season that came out in '68, do you think that played a lot into what was going on in society at the time? Because you had that episode, the quote-unquote space hippie episode, and you had a couple episodes that sort of showed youth revolting. Do you think they kind of played into that?
I think Star Trek was trying to bring messages to the people that would be relevant to what was happening in the world at that time in a sci-fi sense of the word. That was what happened in the day that day. Am I phrasing this right? They were trying to bring the message of the 60s, but still keep it sci-fi and Star Trek.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it had a lot to do with it.
So,
plus, every hippie I knew was a Trekkie.
And it was a damn fine show. All right, so since I'm trying to stay on sheet here, and I asked you what you would tell the protesters of today, what do you think came out of all your protesting from the 60s?
I think we changed the world for the better. I think people learned that we had a message, and it was a good message. Now, let me say this. A big portion of the people back there, you know, there was a lot of free drugs running around, a lot of free sex running around. A lot of people, that was all they were interested in.
And that was just you.
Well, nothing wrong with taking advantage of that as long as you keep your message right.
Right.
But we had people that actually started listening. We had political leaders that actually started looking at the war in Vietnam and trying to get us out of there. They started realizing this is not a good thing. This is not our business. Not to mention the fact that we were losing in Vietnam, and we had good young people getting killed for no reason because we were not going to win that war. Like I said before, the South Vietnamese, they didn't want us there.
Right.
They wanted to be communist. And we're talking freedom, but we didn't want to give them the right to choose. And there's no freedom in that. John Kennedy, who was, by the way, was my other great hero. 3 times in my life I've died. I cried when somebody died that was not family or somebody that I did not really know. I cried when John Kennedy died. I cried when John Wayne died. And I cried when Martin Luther King Jr. died. But John Kennedy said, when peaceful protest becomes impossible, then, how did he put it? Basically what he was saying is, when we can't protest peacefully, then violent revolution. That was what I was looking for.
Right.
When peaceful protest becomes impossible, violent revolution becomes inevitable. So, little word for America from the past that they need to really think about and consider.
Man, I really do miss that guy. He was the absolute best, and I can't thank him enough for that interview and for all the support on Spock Rock Radio and back to Radio Kronos and even back to Crush. He was one of a kind and sorely, sorely missed. Now, if you have any thoughts about the protest movements going on today, or even about the 60s protest movement, let me know on Too Boldly Pod on Facebook or Twitter. Now, periodically on this podcast, we like to pose social media questions, and the reason for doing it is because the last topic is everything seems to be so serious, especially on social media, that I think it's good to sort of lighten everything up and give everyone something to talk about where you can have some fun with it. So we ask questions here to social media, and then we share everybody's answers, and we all have a little bit of fun. So this week's Too Boldly Pod question is, or was, what movie that's hugely popular that most people seem to love, but really you just cannot stand it? And I got a few responses to it, and it was fun to see what people thought and what people loved and disliked. Now, my friend Karen, when I asked her the question, she said maybe people are going to get angry at me for this, but she said she really didn't like the movie Wonder Woman. And Kate answered Pretty Woman. Sarah answered 2001 A Space Odyssey. Jim answered Dirty Dancing. Mark answered Titanic, Armageddon. Shannon answered Kill Bill. And Aaron answered Lost in Translation. Now, this exercise isn't meant to make you angry at people because they don't like a movie that you like. And you know what? It's made because we're all different. We all like different things. And my answer to that question is one that really surprises a lot of people, because this movie is really a cult beloved film. And my answer to it is I just could not stand the movie, was Napoleon Dynamite. So check us out. Maybe you can let me know, if you didn't answer, what your least favorite huge popular movie is on Facebook or Twitter. Or follow us on Facebook or Twitter for the next Too Boldly Pod question. Now, for our sports topic this week, this is sort of a plea or an offer, an invitation to somebody that maybe listens to this podcast that would like to come on and help me understand a growing trend in sports these days, specifically with fans, and it's the tanking of your favorite team. Now, what I want to know and what I want to talk to somebody about is, why is it okay for you to espouse for your team to tank, but it's not okay for, say, somebody to be critical of your team because they're not happy about something? What's the difference in one person being negative about sports, which we all tend to be? I mean, we're fans after all, so you get upset. So my question is, and if someone would be willing to come on here, I would love to chat with them. What is the difference between somebody giving their opinion, spouting their opinion, being negative about a sports team, and somebody that's actively rooting for them to lose just to improve their draft status for next year? Because to me, there really isn't any difference. If you're going to do them both, then if you're going to do one, then why can't you do the other? So if anyone's interested, contact me on Facebook or Twitter at Too Boldly Pod, and maybe we will revisit this topic somewhere down the line. Well, that's going to wrap up another edition of Too Boldly Pod. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Billy about the 60s protest movement in relation to today's protests. I hope you had a little bit of fun, or maybe have an answer for me about this week's Too Boldly Pod question about what famous popular movie that everybody seems to love that you just can't stand. And hopefully there's somebody out there that can help me with this week's sports topic. And it all has to do with, why is it okay to actively root for your team to tank, but it's not okay for somebody else to be negative about your team? So if you have any thoughts or would like to join me on a future Too Boldly Pod, contact me on Facebook or Twitter at Too Boldly Pod. And thank you all for tuning in. As usual, I have no closer for this podcast, so I'll simply say, do or do not. There is no try. Have a good day, everybody.